You are with breakfast. The United Kingdom has suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong. This is big news. It happened overnight. And will certainly heighten tensions with Beijing, as well as increasing the growing distance between the West and the Chinese Communist Party leadership. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab signalled it was coming after China imposed a draconian national security law on the former British colony, and it comes less than a week after the UK banned Chinese telecommunications company Huawei as a long-term supplier for its 5G network over concerns about its infrastructure securities. To help us understand the significance of this, we are really grateful to be joined by foreign policy expert and Otago University Professor Robert Patman. Professor Patman, Robert, it's lovely to have you. Gosh, you're looking smart for this hour of the morning. Thank you for coming in.
Morena, John.
You're raising standards on the program. Boy, this is big, isn't it? And I see the Labour Party is saying we're going to support you, Tories. So this is a strong move from the UK. What does it mean?
Sorry, John, I'm getting slight interference on the headset here.
OK.
Could you just repeat that question, please?
Well, I guess, what does it mean?
Basically, Britain has been very upset with China because of the fact that the Chinese have responded to the protests in Hong Kong by passing this draconian national security law, which, as the British see it, is a contravention of the one country, two systems agreement, and which Britain signed with China. It was implemented in 1997, which was supposed to preserve the freedoms that Hong Kongers had enjoyed when they were under the colonial rule from Britain. So what the British believe is that Hong Kong have violated this international agreement between the two of them, and they believe that those freedoms should have been preserved until Hong Kong was actually full sovereignty was ceded to Hong Kong in 2047.
Yeah. Robert, how bad is that interference? Is it quite bad? Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you, yes, but it seems to be receding now, thankfully.
Good. OK, yeah, good. I could actually hear the echo of it coming back through the microphone, so we appreciate your professionalism in carrying on. This speaks to so many larger issues, doesn't it? And I want to address them as well as we possibly can in the time. But there is an increasing distance between Western governments and the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping now, isn't there? So let's talk about Xi Jinping's endgame. What is he playing at?
Well, I think Xi Jinping, firstly, I think what we have to take into account that China has become increasingly conscious of its enhanced military and economic power during the last decade. In a sense, China has become more China-centric and more assertive since it signed, say, the free trade agreement with New Zealand in 2008. And in a sense, China believes, as a great power, as a superpower, it should have the ability to be an influential player. And I think, in a sense, there's been an assumption on the Chinese leadership that it can maintain its authoritarian one-party state values and project them to some degree internationally. And, of course, it's meeting real resistance in places like Hong Kong and Taiwan. And this is, at the moment, if you look at the Five Eyes, it's only New Zealand at the moment that hasn't suspended the extradition treaty. The reason these countries have suspended the extradition treaty is because they're fearful that under that agreement, then people could be sent, peaceful protesters could be sent to China and face criminal actions.
Robert, that's a justifiable fear, isn't it? I mean, that will happen, won't it? That's where protesters are going to end up, isn't it, on the mainland and in mainland prisons?
What we've seen in the last year is that China has increasingly eroded the freedoms which had previously been allowed in Hong Kong. So China has moved in terms of its foreign policy posture to some degree.
I want to talk about New Zealand in a minute. You raised them. It was interesting watching the Prime Minister kind of dance over fairly thin ice, I thought, yesterday, but we'll come back to that in a sec. So what does the West do? I mean, if Xi Jinping is committed to a kind of unilateralism, and if we know what's happening to the Uyghur people, if we know what's happening to pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, but China's carrying on doing it regardless, what can the West do?
Well, I don't think it's... I think the West is trying to send China a message at the moment, which is to try, in a sense, to try and diffuse off the prospect of enhanced confrontation in the future. You know, China is critically dependent on access to the United States, EU and Japan. These are its three biggest export markets. And in a sense, I think many of the actors involved know this. China's economic rise is inextricably linked to their ability to be economically successful. And if you think about it, if they fall out with the likes of Japan, the EU and the United States, that could have long-term economic ramifications, not only for China's economic prosperity, but also for the political position of the Communist Party in China. This ruling Communist Party has an unofficial social contract with its people. You let us govern and we'll deliver you economic prosperity. And let's face it, since the late 70s, that deal, that bargain has worked quite well. But China's position is not invincible, and China is economically interdependent with the rest of the world. And I think, in a sense, what Mr. Trump and many others, or a few others, have been trying to indicate is that the rest of the world's leverage on China is not necessarily weak.
Robert, I've had the rap, but I really want to ask you this question, and that is, I saw the Prime Minister yesterday talking about New Zealand's principal concerns about what's happening in Hong Kong and with the Uyghur people. But as you point out, we're the only one of the Five Eyes nations to not have severed this extradition treaty. Do we have to do more, and are we going to?
Well, we're reviewing it, and I think, to be fair, the Prime Minister's made her concerns very clear about Uyghurs and the situation in Hong Kong directly to the Chinese leadership. I think the thing is that New Zealand does not want to be depicting itself as a lackey of the Trump administration. New Zealand doesn't share the worldview of either the Chinese leadership or the Trump administration. I think New Zealand's position in a nutshell is it shares the concerns of its Five Eyes partners, but it's expressing them in a more nuanced way in the hope that it can send a signal to China without alienating the Chinese leadership.
Professor Robert Patman from the University of Otago, we always so appreciate you, Robert. Thank you so
Pleasure.
much for coming in and giving us your insight and expertise. Lovely to talk to you as always.
Thank you, John.